South Africa has introduced new BE codes, which businesses now need to adhere to or face penalties. Joining us now to explain the basics of the codes and how technology can help is Bruce Rowe, Head of Empowered. Bruce, thanks for your time today. Alec earlier on mentioned in the beginning of the show that you have sunshine views with regard to the new BE codes that have been launched. So what are your views? Positive, I take it nonetheless.
Yeah. Look, obviously there's some challenges that companies will face, and I think the important thing is to distinguish between what's good for companies and what's good for the economy, and essentially what the objectives are of the DTI in terms of driving the policy. The key changes I think that can have a positive impact on the country are the increased focus and recognition around skills development, and the introduction of a new scorecard element called enterprise and supplier development, which is really focusing on the development of small, medium businesses and black-owned businesses. And I think both of those aspects of the codes can really assist the country in achieving growth objectives.
I'm happy that you touched on the skills development, because as far as I take it you go, you find that there's a strong focus that will be brought into the HR management facilities of any organization to make sure that skills are transferred, skills are developed within the organizations, so that new employees from previously disadvantaged backgrounds will be absorbed into the working system on a full-time basis.
Yeah, absolutely. The downside from a company perspective is that the budget has increased, or the targets, from 3 to 6%. But if you look at it from a global best practice perspective, 6% is not unrealistic. And if you equate that back to the demographic of the country, it's actually quite reasonable.
Just say that again, 6% of what?
Of the total wage and salary cost of a business.
So you're going to tell me that the 6% of my salary, of my wage bill, as an employer, now has to be spent on sending people on training courses?
Correct.
Have you been to a training course lately?
Not many.
Have you had a look at how people sleep in training courses? These are lovely idealistic ideas, but the reality is training courses are often not beneficial.
Sure.
I do a lot of presentations to training courses of professionals, and the guys come in, sign in, and then sometimes
Not
leave.
off.
Hopefully some of them stay.
Sure.
But the reality is, why are we supporting yet another little bit of social engineering when we should be supporting an economy that's growing?
I think there's a number of aspects to that. The one is, having spent several years advising companies around black economic empowerment, is I get the sense that a lot of companies train for the sake of training as opposed to for the benefit of the employee and the company. And so I think there's some bad training out there and there's some good training out there. And the codes should hopefully encourage companies to focus on the good training. And a lot of the training focus will be around accredited formal training, both of employed and unemployed people. And there are challenges around skills in the country, and I believe that's why the DTI has introduced an increased focus around training unemployed people as well, and a criteria to not just train unemployed people, but to absorb them in the business and into the industries in which they operate. So that should encourage them, we hope, to engage in beneficial training, because at the end of the day they're going to train these unemployed people and they need to absorb them back into the business or the industry. So they've got to do the right training that's going to benefit not just the people but the companies and the industries in which they operate.
So once they're employed, do they become employees? Do they become members of our wonderful labour relations?
They
or
would.
Beneficiaries
Absolutely.
of that? So why would companies even think of doing that? Because they can't get rid of them. That's the reality.
Yeah.
If you can't fire, why hire? And we see this in this country.
I think the firing part is a huge constraint in terms of doing business in the country, but we assume that there's going to be some economic growth emerging at some stage. I think we perhaps are way off that, but it's going to come at some stage. So if you tie in the development of skills to the economic growth, they should go hand in hand and work together. As the economy grows, companies should be employing more people, and we hope that they'll be employing people that have been through relevant training that'll have a positive impact on their businesses.
The only question that comes top of mind right now is why develop skills if the education isn't there? Because you can try to assist people in developing their skills and increasing the intellectual capacity, but unless the basics are there, how do you draw up those links?
I think the government's putting the onus on the private sector to do a lot of the training. So taking into account the constraints around developing skills in the country. At the end of the day, the private sector is going to be encouraged to do that themselves because of this increased focus around training unemployed people. So if you look at it from a socio-economic development or CSI perspective, we've always held the belief that companies should focus a lot of their efforts around education. Notwithstanding the fact that there's lots of brilliant programs out there, at the end of the day, one of our constraints in the country is education. So if they focus a lot of their CSI initiatives around education right at the grassroots level and essentially evolve people through an education process, that then ties into the skills development requirement around training unemployed people and then absorbing them into the business. So I think if companies adopt well thought out strategies around linking these different scorecard elements and looking to achieve the objectives that are out there, it can be beneficial. I don't think it's particularly easy, but I think if companies do the right things and they adopt a sound approach, it can be beneficial.
Bruce, before we let you go, of those strategies, I understand technology is one of them. How can they make use of technology in this space?
There's a lot of benefit around, we should say there's a lot of small businesses that have been developed over the last years, driven largely through what is on the current codes regarded as enterprise development. I think we're seeing an emergence of more and more incubators across different sectors. And with the change in the codes around enterprise and supply development, as I said, there's this increased focus around developing the SMME sector and specifically black-owned businesses. And if you look at any global research around economic development, given where we've come from over the last 6 years, there's a lot of focus around developing SMME sectors, regardless of which country we're operating in. So I think that can have a positive impact. We've seen that there are a lot of good success stories where small businesses have been developed and they've become sustainable growth businesses. What we're not seeing is that in different industry sectors, there's a lot of great development, but there's no sharing of what companies, which of the large companies have developed which small companies. So it's done in relative isolation. So we're seeing an opportunity for industries to aggregate their efforts around enterprise development and using technology as the basis to aggregate all these good initiatives and expose these small businesses through really a process of network facilitation and giving them access to the broader economy and really getting those large companies to understand that there are a lot of these small businesses that have been developed and they are actually sustainable businesses and expose them to the broader economy and hopefully give them greater opportunity. And we believe the best way to do that is using the web technology as an enabler.